The hospital room was too quiet, just the steady beep of monitors and the whisper of the oxygen machine. My phone lay on the white sheets, screen dark, silent. No messages, no calls, no family rushing through the door asking if I was okay. Just silence. I tried calling again, my fingers trembling as I dialed Mom's number. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then finally. "Hello, Sarah, honey, can this wait? We're about to go snorkeling with your brother." I could hear laughter in the background, the sound of waves, my brother Mark's voice calling out something about dolphins. My throat tightened. "Mom, I can't feel my legs. The doctors say." "Oh, sweetheart, you're probably just tired from working too hard. You know how you get," she said, distracted. "Mark just got this amazing job offer, and we had to celebrate. You understand, right?" I looked down at my legs, useless under the hospital blanket. The doctor's words echoed in my head. Severe inflammation of the spinal cord, possible permanent damage if not treated immediately. But all I said was, "Mom, please, I'm scared." "Don't ruin this for him," she snapped. "We'll call you when we get back next week. Just handle it yourself for once." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, tears blurring my vision. Outside my window, the October rain painted gray streaks against the glass, matching the emptiness I felt inside. That was the moment I realized I'd always been alone, even when surrounded by family. At 28, I'd spent my entire life being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who never asked for anything. Meanwhile, Mark, my 25-year-old brother, was their golden child. Everything he did was cause for celebration. When he got his first job out of college, a position our dad's golf buddy handed him, they threw a party that cost more than my monthly salary. When he wanted to quit 6 months later to find himself, they supported him financially without question. And now, when he landed another job through another family connection, they dropped everything for a spontaneous Hawaiian vacation. The doctor came in, his face serious. "Miss Carter, we need to start treatment immediately. The inflammation is spreading. Do you have any family members who can sign as your medical proxy?" I almost laughed. "No," I whispered. "There's no one." The next few days blurred together in a haze of medications, tests, and physical therapy. I learned to measure time by nurse shifts rather than days. My phone remained silent except for one text from Mom. "Having the best time. Mark got upgraded to first class for the flight home." The physical therapist, Lisa, became my only regular visitor. She was tough but kind, pushing me to try moving my legs even when it felt impossible. "You're stronger than you think," she'd say, watching me struggle. "Sometimes being alone makes you stronger." One morning, about 5 days into my hospital stay, I woke up to find Lisa sitting by my bed, scrolling through her phone. "Your Instagram stalking skills need work," she said with a slight smile. "Took me 5 minutes to find your family's vacation photos." She turned her phone toward me. There they were, Mom, Dad, and Mark, all sun-kissed and smiling on a Hawaiian beach. The caption read, "Perfect family vacation with our amazing son." Hashtag was hashtag family first. I felt something crack inside me, but it wasn't sadness anymore. It was like a wall breaking, letting in light I hadn't known existed. "You know what's funny?" I said, my voice steady. "I've been paying their credit card bills for the past 2 years." Lisa's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "Dad's business hit some rough patches. I've been covering their mortgage too. And Mark's rent. And his car payments." I laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I'm their personal ATM, but they couldn't even skip one snorkeling session to check on me." "Why?" Lisa asked simply. "Because that's what family does." I repeated the words they'd fed me for years. At least that's what they told me family does. That night, lying in my hospital bed, I made a decision. I pulled out my laptop, thank God for hospital Wi-Fi, and started making changes. First, I canceled all the automatic payments to their accounts. Then I froze the credit cards I'd been paying for. Finally, I emailed my resignation to the family company where I'd been working under my father for the past 7 years. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. The machine monitoring my heart rate beeped faster. But for the first time in days, I felt alive. The next morning, I had 37 missed calls and countless texts. They must have landed back home. "Mom, the cards aren't working." "What did you do?" "Dad, this is unacceptable behavior." "Mark, Hey sis, can you fix whatever's wrong with my card? Need to order takeout. I turned off my phone and focused on my physical therapy. By the end of the week, I could wiggle my toes. Small victories, Lisa called them. But to me, each movement was a revolution. The day I was discharged, leaning on a walker but standing on my own 2 feet, I found my parents waiting in a hospital lobby. Mom rushed forward, arms outstretched, but stopped short when she saw my face. Where have you been? Dad demanded. The company's in chaos. The bills are piling up, and you're what? Playing hospital. I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time in years. Mom in her designer clothes, Dad in his expensive suit, both of them tanned from their vacation. They looked like strangers. Playing hospital? I repeated softly. I lost feeling in my legs. I could have been paralyzed, but you were too busy with Mark's celebration to care. Now, sweetheart, Mom started, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes darting to the people around us. You know we love you, but Mark needed. I needed you. The words exploded out of me, echoing through the lobby. I needed my family, but you were too busy posting perfect family photos without me. Dad stepped forward, his face red. Lower your voice. You're making a scene. A scene? I laughed. You want to talk about scenes? How about the scene of your daughter lying in a hospital bed alone while you went snorkeling? We didn't know it was serious, Mom protested weakly. You didn't ask. I straightened up, ignoring the pain shooting through my legs. But that's okay. I get it now. I'm not family. I'm the bank. Well, the bank is closed. What's that supposed to mean? Dad's voice had that dangerous edge I remembered from childhood. Check your accounts, I said simply. Everything I've been paying for, the mortgage, the credit cards, Mark's expenses, it's all stopped. You're on your own. Mom's face went pale. You can't do that. We're your parents. Parents? I gripped my walker tighter. Parents don't abandon their child in the hospital. Parents don't ignore emergency calls for a vacation. You want to be parents? Start acting like it. I started walking toward the exit, each step slow but deliberate. Behind me, I heard Mom start to cry and Dad's angry protests, but I didn't look back. Lisa was waiting by her car to drive me to my apartment. You okay? She asked as she helped me in. No, I admitted. But I will be. That night, alone in my apartment, I started planning. I had savings. Quite a lot, actually, now that I wasn't supporting 3 extra adults. I had an MBA I earned taking night classes, something my family had called a waste of time. And I had something else. Freedom. I spent the next week ignoring their calls and focusing on recovery. My legs got stronger every day, but the doctors said I might always have some weakness. But weak legs didn't mean a weak spirit. 2 weeks after I left the hospital, I received an email from one of Dad's business competitors. They'd heard I'd left the family company and were interested in my expertise. The salary they offered was double what I'd been making. I accepted immediately. The day I started my new job, I got a text from Mark. Hey sis, really need help with rent. Landlord's threatening eviction. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Sounds serious. Maybe ask Mom and Dad to cut their Hawaii trip short next time. Then I blocked his number. My new job was everything the family company wasn't. Professional, merit-based, with room for growth. Within 6 months, I was heading my own department. Within a year, I was on the executive track. I heard through mutual friends that Dad's business was struggling without me there to manage everything. Mom had to sell her designer bags. Mark got evicted and moved back home. They were drowning, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't their lifeguard. The physical therapy continued. Some days were harder than others, but I kept pushing. Lisa became more than my therapist. She became my first real friend. We started having weekly dinner dates where she'd update me on her latest dating disasters, and I'd share stories about my family's increasingly desperate attempts to contact me. Your mom showed up at my clinic today, she told me one evening over Thai food. Wanted to know if he told me where you were moving to. I nearly choked on my pad thai. Moving to. Apparently, they drove by your apartment and saw the for rent sign. They think you're leaving town to avoid them. I hadn't planned on moving, but suddenly it seemed perfect. My lease was ending anyway. And with my new salary, I could afford something better. Something they couldn't just drive by whenever they wanted. That weekend, I went house hunting. Not for an apartment, for a house. A big one, with a guest house that sat empty and waiting like a reminder of everything they'd lost. When I found it, I knew immediately it was perfect. 5 bedrooms in the main house, a pool, and a guest house bigger than my old apartment. The real estate agent kept apologizing for showing me something so expensive, but I just smiled and made an offer. 2 weeks later, I moved in. I hired decorators to make it perfect, not the cheap furniture I'd grown up with, but real, elegant pieces. The guest house I left empty, like a blank canvas waiting for the right moment. The day I finished moving in, I received a letter from my parents' lawyer. They were facing foreclosure on their house. Dad's business was failing. They needed help. I sat in my new home office, looking out over my pool, and felt a strange sense of peace. They were finally learning what it felt like to be truly alone. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had Lisa, my new colleagues who respected me, and most importantly, I had myself. The weak legs that had started this whole journey, they carried me exactly where I needed to be. That night, I sat down and wrote an email to my family, not out of anger or revenge, but from a place of strength. I heard about your situation. I remember what it's like to need help and have no one there. I remember lying in a hospital bed while you enjoyed your perfect family vacation. But unlike you, I learned from that experience. So here's what I'm offering. The response to my email was immediate and chaotic. Within minutes, my phone exploded with notifications. I sat in my home office, watching the sun set over my pool as their messages poured in. Mom, oh sweetheart, we knew you'd come around. Family always sticks together. Dad, finally showing some sense. I'll have my lawyer draw up the paperwork for the loan. Mark, hey sis, can I move in with you? My room at Mom and Dad's is kind of cramped. They hadn't even read past the first line. Typical. I took a sip of my wine and opened the full email I'd sent them. I heard about your situation. I remember what it's like to need help and have no one there. I remember lying in a hospital bed while you enjoyed your perfect family vacation. But unlike you, I learned from that experience. So here's what I'm offering. The guest house on my property is available, but it comes with conditions. Dad resigns from his company and hands over all control to his business partner. Mom sells all her designer items, everything. Mark gets a real job, no family connections, no handed-down positions. You all attend family therapy separately and together. Meet these conditions and you can live in my guest house, rent-free for 1 year. Time to rebuild your lives from scratch, just like I had to. You have 48 hours to decide. Sarah. The next wave of messages was markedly different. Dad, this is outrageous. I built that company. Mom, you can't be serious about my collections. Some of those are investments. Mark, what do you mean real job? My jobs were real. I turned off my phone and went for a swim in my pool. The water helped my legs, which still gave me trouble sometimes. As I floated on my back, looking up at the darkening sky, I thought about how far I'd come from that hospital bed. The next morning, Lisa came over for breakfast. She'd become not just my physical therapist, but my closest friend and unofficial therapist. I showed her the email and the responses. Harsh, she said, buttering her toast. But fair. Do you think they'll accept? They don't have a choice, I replied. The bank's foreclosing on their house next month. Dad's company is hemorrhaging money. Mark can't get a job because his reputation for quitting is all over town. They're out of options, and you're okay with them living so close. I looked out at the guest house, sitting empty across my perfectly manicured lawn. It's not about having them close. It's about them learning what it means to start over, what it means to be truly grateful. The 48-hour deadline was approaching when I received an email from Mom. The tone was different this time. No exclamation points, no emotional manipulation. Sarah, your father and I have discussed your conditions. It wasn't an easy discussion. He threw things. I cried. Mark locked himself in his room. But we accept. Your father contacted his business partner this morning. The paperwork for his resignation will be ready next week. I've already listed my first batch of items on consignment. And Mark, well, he's on Indeed.com right now, looking at entry-level positions. We don't deserve your help. We know that now. The day you called from the hospital, we failed you, not just as parents, but as human beings. It took losing everything to realize what we've thrown away. When can we move in? Mom, I read the email 3 times before forwarding it to Lisa with a simple message: "It's happening." I had the guest house cleaned and furnished minimally. Basic beds, a simple couch, a small TV. Nothing fancy. Nothing like the luxury they were used to. But it was clean, safe, and most importantly, free. They moved in on a Sunday. I watched from my home office window as their single car, they had to sell the others, pulled up, loaded with what remained of their possessions. Dad looked older than I remembered, his shoulders hunched. Mom's designer clothes were replaced with simple jeans and a t-shirt. Mark actually carried boxes without complaining. I waited until they'd unloaded everything before walking out to meet them. The sight of me made Mom burst into tears. "The rules are simple," I said, handing them each a key. "You live your own lives. You figure out your own paths. I'm not your bank, your backup plan, or your safety net. I'm your landlord, and this is your chance to rebuild." "And family therapy?" Dad asked, his voice rough. "Starts Tuesday. I've already scheduled the appointments. Individual sessions first, then group sessions once the therapist thinks we're ready." "We'll do better this time," Mom whispered. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw something real in her eyes. Not manipulation, not performance, but genuine remorse. "I hope so," I said, "because this is your last chance." As I walked back to my house, I heard Mark call out, "Sarah, wait." I turned. My brother, the golden child, the one they'd chosen over me again and again, stood there looking lost. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I never realized, I never saw." "You weren't meant to see," I replied. That was the problem. That night, I sat in my home office, looking out at the lit windows of the guest house. They were in there, my family, starting over. Part of me wanted to go check on them, to make sure they were okay. Old habits die hard. But I didn't. Instead, I opened my laptop and started working on my latest project proposal. I had my own life to live, my own success to build. They needed to learn to do the same. Lisa texted me, "You okay?" I looked out at the guest house again, then down at my legs, stronger now, but never quite the same. Just like my relationship with my family would never be quite the same. "Yes," I replied. "For the first time in a long time, I really am." The real work was just beginning. But this time, we were all starting from the same place, rock bottom. The only way left was up. The first month of having my family in the guest house was like watching a reality show about people learning to live normal lives. Every morning, I watched from my kitchen window as they adjusted to their new reality. Dad, who once wouldn't even make his own coffee, now waited at the bus stop in his off-the-rack suit, heading to his new job as a junior sales consultant. Mom had taken a position at a local boutique, ironically selling the kind of designer items she used to collect. And Mark, he was working 2 jobs, mornings at a coffee shop and evenings doing data entry. The family therapy sessions were interesting, to say the least. "Your daughter felt abandoned during a medical crisis," Dr. Torres said during our first group session. "How does that make you feel?" "We didn't know it was serious," Mom protested weakly. "Because you didn't ask," I cut in. "You were too busy posting photos with #blessed and #perfectfamily, while I couldn't feel my legs." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Dr. Torres raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Carter, choosing the wrong tie is a mistake. Abandoning your daughter in the hospital while vacationing with your son is a choice." The individual sessions were even more revealing. Dr. Torres shared, with permission, that Dad had broken down crying in his session, admitting he'd always been jealous of my business acumen. "She was better at running my company than I ever was," he'd said. "It was easier to favor Mark than face my own inadequacy." Mom's sessions uncovered her desperate need for social validation. Having a successful son to show off was easier than explaining why my daughter worked so hard, she'd admitted. I chose the easier story. Mark's revelations were perhaps the most surprising. "I knew they were wrong," he told Dr. Torres. "I knew they treated Sarah badly, but I was scared if I spoke up, they'd stop supporting me too. So I played my part." One evening, about 6 weeks into their stay, I heard a knock at my back door. It was Mark, holding a paper cup from his coffee shop. "I made this for you," he said awkwardly. "I remembered you like oat milk lattes with an extra shot." I accepted the cup, surprised he'd remembered my coffee order at all. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat by the pool, the same pool I'd once floated in while contemplating their fate. Mark looked different now, less polished, more real. His hands had calluses from work, and there were bags under his eyes from his double shifts. I got offered a promotion today, he said. Assistant manager at the coffee shop. That's good, I replied carefully. Yeah, it is, and you know what's crazy? I'm actually proud of it, like really proud. Because I earned it myself. He looked at me. I never earned anything before, did I? I took a sip of my latte. It was perfectly made. No, you didn't. I'm sorry, Sarah, not just for the hospital thing, but for everything. For every time I took advantage, every time I let them favor me, every time I watched you carry us all and said nothing. The sincerity in his voice made my throat tight. You were a kid, Mark. But I'm not anymore. He stood up. Thank you. Not for the guest house or the second chance, but for showing me who I could be without them propping me up. As he walked away, I realized something had shifted. The anger I carried for so long was starting to feel lighter. The changes in my parents were slower, but steady. Dad came home one evening practically glowing. He'd made his first independent sale. No family connections, no old golf buddies, just pure skill and effort. The client chose my proposal over 2 others, he told me when I ran into him getting his mail. First time in my life, I know I earned something entirely on my own. Mom's transformation was more subtle but perhaps more profound. I spotted her one Sunday, sitting in the guest house garden, reading a book. Not posting on social media, not making calls to her old society friends, just being. When she saw me watching, she called out, Sarah, would you like to join me? I hesitated, then grabbed my own book. We sat in comfortable silence, reading together as the sun set. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close to peace. The physical therapy clinic where I'd first met Lisa hosted a fundraiser for spinal cord injury research. I decided to attend and after some thought, invited my family. They all came, dressed in their new, modest clothes. As I gave a speech about my experience, about lying alone in that hospital bed, I watched their faces. There was pain there, real pain, not the performative kind I was used to seeing. But sometimes, I said, concluding my speech, hitting rock bottom shows you who you really are. And more importantly, it shows you who you can become. Later, during the reception, Lisa pulled me aside. Look at them, she said, nodding toward my family. They were working the room, but not like they used to. Dad was earnestly discussing his new job with a physical therapist. Mom was helping arrange silent auction items without taking over or demanding attention. Mark was serving drinks, comfortable in his role as service staff. They're different, I admitted. No, Lisa corrected. They're real, maybe for the first time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my window, looking out at the guest house. The lights were off, but I could see the outline of the building against the starlit sky. 6 months ago, it had been a symbol of my revenge, a way to show them what it felt like to be dependent on someone else's charity. Now it was something else. A halfway house between who they were and who they were becoming. A bridge between our past and whatever future we might build. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Thank you for coming to our therapy session today. I know it's not easy hearing us talk about our failures, but I want you to know, we see you now. Really see you. I didn't respond, but I saved the message. Another piece of evidence that people can change if you give them no choice but to face themselves. My legs ached. They always did when I stood too long. But I remained at the window, watching the night sky. The same sky I'd looked at from my hospital bed, feeling alone and abandoned. Now, standing in my own home, surrounded by a family slowly learning what that word really means, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not for a perfect reconciliation. Some wounds leave permanent scars. But for something new, something real, growing from the ashes of what we'd burned down together. 1 year passed faster than I expected. The deadline I'd given them for their stay in the guest house was approaching, and I found myself sitting in my home office, contemplating what came next. In 12 months, they transformed in ways I never imagined possible. Dad had earned a promotion at his new job, not through connections, but through genuine hard work. Mom had become the top salesperson at the boutique, connecting with customers through authenticity rather than superficial charm. And Mark, he was now managing the coffee shop full-time and taking night classes in business administration. Dr. Torres had cleared us from mandatory family therapy, though we all chose to continue our individual sessions. Some wounds, she'd said in our final group meeting, never fully heal, but they can become reminders of how far we've come. The morning of their last day, I invited them to breakfast in my house, something I hadn't done since they moved into the guest house. They arrived looking nervous, carrying a large envelope. Before we eat, Dad said, his voice steady but his hands shaking, "We want to show you something." Inside the envelope were lease papers for a small apartment, not in the expensive part of town they used to live in, but in a decent neighborhood they could afford on their combined new salaries. "We found it last month," Mom explained. "We wanted you to know we weren't expecting to stay longer. We've learned to stand on our own feet." Mark pulled out something else, his first business school transcript. All A's. "I'm paying for it myself," he said proudly. "No loans, no handouts. Just my savings from work." We sat down to eat, and for the first time in years, the conversation felt real. No hidden agendas, no manipulations, just family sharing a meal. "Sarah," Mom said suddenly, putting down her fork, "we know this year wasn't about the guest house. It was about teaching us what you went through, what it means to start over." Dad nodded. "We failed you. Not just at the hospital, but for years before that. We took your strength for granted, used it to prop up our own weaknesses. But you gave us a chance to learn," Mark added, "to become people worthy of being your family." I looked at them, really looked at them. Dad in his modest but well-kept suit, ready for another day of earning his way. Mom in her simple clothes, no designer labels in sight, but somehow looking more elegant than ever. Mark in his coffee shop manager's uniform, worn with pride rather than shame. The guest house was never about punishment, I said finally. It was about hope. Hope that somewhere under all the pretense and privilege, there were people worth knowing. I stood up and walked to my office, returning with an envelope of my own. I had my lawyer draw these up last week. They opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a new lease for the guest house, along with terms for a rent-to-own agreement. "If you want to stay," I said, "you can. At fair market rent. And after 5 years, if you keep up the payments, it's yours. A real home, earned, not given." The tears in their eyes were different from the manipulative ones I'd grown up with. These were real, just like they had finally become real. "We don't deserve this," Mom whispered. "No," I agreed. "But you've earned the chance to try." Later that evening, I sat by my pool, Lisa beside me with our usual wine and takeout. "So they're staying," she said. "You okay with that?" I looked at the guest house, where lights glowed warmly in the growing dusk. Through the window, I could see them having dinner together. A simple meal, nothing fancy, but they were laughing. "You know what I realized?" I said. "Sometimes the biggest strength isn't in walking away. It's in giving people the chance to walk back to you, even if the path is longer and harder than they expected." My legs twinged, a familiar reminder of where this journey started. But I wasn't in that hospital bed anymore, alone and abandoned. I was home, surrounded by a family that had learned the hard way what that word really means. "They're not perfect," I added. "Neither am I. But maybe that's what real family is, people who keep trying, keep growing, keep earning their place in each other's lives." Lisa raised her glass. "To earning it." I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. "To earning it."